When Americans are being told to tighten their belts, when over 13 million people face losing Medicaid, the last thing you'd expect to hear is a request for $50 million to buy a luxury private jet. Yet that's exactly what happened, and the senator who brought it up didn't pull any punches. He made sure the entire room understood the weight of that contradiction. Senator Ruben Grugo sat across from Kristi Noem and went straight for the jugular. He laid out the situation in stark terms. Medicaid was on the chopping block, families bracing themselves for devastating cuts, while her department asked taxpayers to foot the bill for a Gulfstream jet, a plane not for emergencies, not for rescue missions, but for comfort and prestige.
Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for attendance today. Let me start by also agreeing with Senator Moreno on some things, and I think it is positive the Trump administration has provided stronger border security to keep illegal border crossings as close to zero as possible. We definitely have seen that in Arizona. My concern is that it's not sustainable. It's expensive. And that's why I recently released a common sense border security that would make it sustainable and would actually deliver long-term solutions. But let me get to my first question. Your department is overspending right now. It's on track to run out of money again by mid-July to support a mass deportation campaign that can't be afforded. At the same time, though, you recently requested a $50 million allotment for a private Gulfstream jet. That's $50 million of taxpayer money to subsidize some of your national tours that you've been going on. Meanwhile, Republicans are about to kick another 13 million people off Medicaid to fund taxes for the rich on the backs of some working-class Americans. So how can you justify spending millions, 50 million, on a jet while your department is definitely overspending, and Republicans in Congress are about to strip also health care from millions of Americans?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. We are spending our dollars appropriately and will be on budget. When your reference to the airframe that was the requested dollars were put in for, that's for the Coast Guard. It's to replace an existing jet that is over 20 years old and is beyond its usable hours. And the Coast Guard for many, many years has been neglected and has many airframe that have been grounded because they can't even be maintained anymore. The suppliers that give us parts and repairs and maintenance for them have said that they'll no longer support that kind of a mission. We have cutters that haven't been completed, that haven't been deployed out across the world. And then we also, beyond that, are asking for a request to build out the number of Coast Guard members that we need in place. We're asking for 15,000 more to complete the missions that are going forward.
Are you going to have access to that $50 million Gulfstream jet that the Coast Guard is going to supply?
The Coast Guard will use that jet exactly how it uses the jets that it has today, exactly in the same manner that it uses the ones that it has in place today.
So would you consistently be using it to travel?
I don't know if I would use that one or if I would use the other one. I have no idea. But I do spend time out there with our components, making sure that they are know that they have a secretary that's engaged with them, that's visiting with them, seeing what their needs are. No, sir, they're not photos. They've meant the world to the individuals at the Department of Homeland Security. They have meant the world to our ICE agents, our border agents. When they ask me to be out there with them, so they know what their lives are like.
Talking to some law enforcement, besides those under DHS, we've also seen some law enforcement that have been pulled away from investigations such as child porn, sex trafficking. We've had some agents pulled in that were doing investigations on bank fraud that are now, provisional ICE agents. And I think creating and making them do this type of work is also making us more and more dangerous since they're not actually doing this long-term investigation. On the other hand, I have talked to some border chiefs and sheriffs repeatedly, and they've been highlighting the danger associated with cartels targeting teenagers in border communities through social media apps and recruiting them to participate in smuggling operations. And one of the bills I introduced with several colleagues here actually is the Combating Cartels on Social Media Act, which will help DHS counter this threat. Arizona communities cannot wait for the legislative process to play out on this. What is DHS doing to solve this problem and help keep American children and communities safe from cartel criminal activity and recruitment too?
Well, that is the problem that we have with the longer that they're here, the more established they become and the more they recruit individuals who may live in this country, U.S. citizens, or even our kids to be a part of their operations. Actually on the other side too.
It's both sides.
What do you mean on their side?
Some of the cartels are using social media on, let's say, Mexico,
yes,
wherever.
Yes, definitely they are.
So it's back and forth.
Yes, they definitely are. But they also are infiltrating our country still by recruiting our children to be a part of their networks.
That's the problem. Yeah.
So we're working with not just the experts that we have within CBP and ICE, but also using our other components to address some of the sophistication that we've seen in these apps as far as CISA and partnerships that they may have with private industry that can give us insight in what we can do to deploy our own counter-terrorist activities and applications to those systems, what we can do to make sure that we're stopping their ability to communicate with our children and bringing awareness. The Department of Homeland Security has programs in different areas such as the Know to Protect and the other programs you may be familiar with.
Have you been able to work directly with the social media companies, though, not just through the legislative process?
We have had conversations with the social media companies. And
because by the time we get around to doing it, we're losing more and more people. So like having a very direct conversation in a concentrated effort to actually have outcomes is going to be quicker because they have the option to do it. We don't have to come in and do it. They just choose not to because they'd rather make more money than anything else.
Well, that may be, but I found them very willing to come to the table. I've had myself spent dozens of hours with them, and my team has spent hundreds of hours visiting with them on what we can do to be much more proactive. So they've got some solutions that we can pursue. We'll be coming to you with some of those ideas, but I think it's important that we use their knowledge of this way of communication and recruitment to help protect our children.
Get back.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary.
$50 million, the kind of aircraft CEOs and billionaires boast about, requested by a government already overspending. His words weren't just questions, they were an indictment of misplaced priorities. Noem's response tried to shift the spotlight. She claimed the money wasn't for her own travel but for the Coast Guard to replace an aging aircraft that was more than 20 years old. She spoke of neglected equipment, outdated planes sitting grounded, suppliers unwilling to service them anymore. She painted a picture of a department stretched thin, arguing that this request was about restoring readiness, not luxury. She even added that the department needed 15,000 more Coast Guard members to fulfill its mission, as if the jet were just one piece of a larger puzzle. But the senator wasn't satisfied with a polished explanation. He pressed harder, asking the obvious follow-up: would she personally be using this new jet? The room went still. Her answer was anything but firm. She stumbled, saying she didn't know if she would use that one or another one, and that she couldn't say for sure. It wasn't the answer of someone confident in her justification. It was the kind of hesitation that only fueled more suspicion. Was this really about the Coast Guard, or was it a convenient cover for executive perks dressed up as necessity? And that's where the heart of the issue came into focus. Because this debate was never just about one jet. It was about values, about choices, about what kind of government priorities taxpayers are being forced to live with. On one side, millions of Americans are bracing for the loss of health care. On the other, a request for a Gulfstream jet, luxury travel justified in bureaucratic language. The disconnect was jarring. The very people who preach fiscal responsibility were greenlighting comfort and convenience on the public's dime. The contradictions don't end there. At the same hearing, alarming admissions surfaced. Critical investigations into organized crime, child exploitation, and cyber threats had been undermined because agents were being pulled away from those tasks to cover deportation operations. Investigators once tasked with tracking down predators and unraveling bank fraud were now reassigned, doing jobs they weren't trained for, leaving vulnerable communities exposed. This wasn't just budget mismanagement, it was a gamble with public safety. Yet even with those dangers acknowledged, the department prioritized new aircraft over fixing the cracks in frontline operations. And while families were being warned of healthcare cuts, DHS itself admitted another crisis was brewing: cartels using social media to recruit American teenagers. Border chiefs and sheriffs had been sounding the alarm, warning that apps were being exploited to lure kids into smuggling operations. These cartels weren't just working across the border, they were infiltrating communities, finding ways to communicate with U.S. citizens and even children. Senators asked what was being done to protect kids from this digital threat. The answer: ongoing conversations, partnerships with tech companies, vague promises of future solutions, no immediate robust plan, no sense of urgency that matched the seriousness of the threat. And here's the chilling reality: while DHS officials spent dozens of hours in meetings with social media companies, children were still being targeted. Families were left wondering why billions could be poured into enforcement theatrics and now a luxury jet, but not into the digital safeguards or specialized units needed to protect kids from being lured into criminal networks. What was supposed to be about national security instead revealed how disconnected leadership had become from the very dangers ordinary families worry about every single day. That's what Senator Grugo managed to expose in a few piercing questions. It wasn't just a clash over numbers on a budget spreadsheet, it was a moral confrontation. What do we value more, the comfort of high-ranking officials or the basic needs of American families? Where should taxpayer dollars go, toward helping communities survive or toward elite perks cloaked in bureaucratic justifications? His line of questioning stripped away the talking points and revealed the raw truth about priorities. And the more you look at it, the more damning it becomes. A $50 million aircraft can't just be brushed aside as a routine expense, not when families are losing coverage, not when investigators are pulled off cases that matter, not when children are at risk of being recruited by criminal organizations. The optics alone are staggering, but the reality is worse. It signals a government out of step with the very people it claims to serve. The senator's confrontation wasn't just a soundbite to go viral online, it was a gut check. A reminder that democracy isn't just about who holds office, it's about whether those officials reflect the values of the people who put them there. And in that moment the disconnect was impossible to ignore. Because while leaders spoke of responsibility, their actions spoke of privilege. While they demanded sacrifice from ordinary Americans, they quietly asked for luxuries for themselves. So the question isn't whether the Coast Guard needs new planes. The question is whether this was the right time, the right priority, the right way to spend 50 million taxpayer dollars. And when placed against the backdrop of healthcare cuts, underfunded investigations, and rising threats to children, the answer becomes painfully clear. It's not just bad optics, it's bad governance. And now the responsibility falls to us. To the people watching, listening, and asking the same questions Senator Grugo asked. If you had $50 million of public money, would you spend it on a Gulfstream jet, or would you spend it protecting kids, safeguarding healthcare, and rebuilding security where it's failing? That's the debate this country faces, not just about one plane, but about what kind of nation we want to be. If that thought makes you angry, or even just uneasy, don't brush it off. Because silence is the very thing that allows these choices to go unchallenged. And if you believe government should serve people, not privilege, now's the time to speak up. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so we can keep digging into the choices being made with your money. Because accountability doesn't happen on its own. It happens when we stay informed, stay engaged, and most of all, stay loud.